In 1913, 12 young men entered St. Anselm Seminary in upstate New York. They were bright, obedient, devout, but they were never ordained, and not one of them was ever seen again. There is no plaque, no gravestone, not even a line in the diocesan archives. Yet once, briefly, there were 12. Their names were recited like prayers, printed in programs for an ordination mass that never came. The class of 1913 vanished like dust behind locked chapel doors. Whispers about them circulate still in St. Anselm's forgotten corners, where mold eats away at hymnals and old wood groans under weightless guilt. The basement vault is sealed. The chapel's altar is permanently stripped. And when you ask the oldest surviving monk what happened to the 12, he simply mutters, "They were too obedient." This is the story no one was meant to remember, a story excised from history like a rotting tooth. But the seminary still stands, its ivy-covered walls now hollow with echoes. The town pretends it doesn't exist. But if you follow the trail of redacted files, vanished records, and one unmailed letter, a terrifying truth begins to emerge. These 12 men never left. And they never stopped praying. Even now, something kneels in the chapel after midnight, but it's not saying the Mass. It surfaced in 1954, found wedged inside a hollow, doubt hymnal during the demolition of a burned-down rectory in Albany. A torn, yellowed letter, no stamp, no envelope, just a desperate message, handwritten in frantic Latin and shaky English, dated June 8, 1913. "They're sealing the lower chapel tonight. Don't let them lie about the fire. Tell my father, this isn't what we thought. It was never ordination, it was." The rest is lost, scorched by mold, perhaps burned deliberately, but the signature was legible. Br. Matthew J. Corcoran, seminarian. Corcoran's name matched one of the 12 listed in the archived 1913 program for St. Anselm's lost ordination class, but there was no record of him after that spring, no death certificate, no transfer, no assignment, nothing. When the Diocese was contacted in 1954, they denied St. Anselm ever had a Corcoran enrolled. But someone wanted the letter found. It was wrapped in a rosary of blackened beads. The crucifix had teeth marks on it, deep ones. That single letter began a quiet, decades-long investigation, one the Church never sanctioned but could never quite silence. Because Br. Matthew's letter hinted at something older than the Church itself, something the seminary tried to bury beneath its stone chapel. St. Anselm Seminary was built in 1866, brick by Jesuit hands, on land purchased quietly from the state after the original owner was found hanged in his orchard with a rope made of braided altar cloth. Locals called the place the Wound, a reference not to the land but to the air itself, how it seemed to breathe wrong, hum at night, resist planting. Bishop Tiberius Fallon personally oversaw the construction, insisting on a subchapel, a second, smaller place of worship buried directly beneath the main altar. The records show it was completed in 1871, but it was never consecrated, not officially. Instead, according to a vanished line in the bishop's personal diary, the space was reserved for rites older than Rome, for prayers not fit for daylight. A chilling phrase, one that surfaced only once more, in a coded letter written by a Dominican inquisitor in 1909. The lower chapel was sealed shortly after the class of 1913 arrived. Some say the 12 were sent there to pray for 40 days in isolation. A preparation ritual steeped in ancient purification traditions, but 40 days passed, then 50, then silence. No one saw them again, but some nights, beneath the cracked tiles of the altar, blood bloomed upward. In the summer of 1913, telegrams were sent, short, formal, final. "Your son has chosen a life of silence and seclusion in service to the Holy Church. He will no longer be able to communicate with the outside world. We ask for your prayers and discretion." 12 identical messages. 12 grieving families, each given a stipend, a wooden cross, and a request to never inquire further. For some, the money was too much to question. For others, the shame was enough. Mrs. Corcoran, mother of Matthew, did not accept the silence. She traveled from Vermont to St. Anselm's with her youngest son, demanding answers. They were turned away at the gate by a brother who claimed there was no one named Matthew at the seminary. A week later, she was found wandering Route 9 barefoot, covered in scratches, her eyes blistered as though from staring into a furnace. She was committed to the Kingston Asylum, where she spoke only one phrase for the rest of her life. He was sewn into the walls. He was sewn into the walls. No grave, no mass, no records, only crosses and payoffs, and parents who started seeing their sons in dreams, but with no eyes. His name was Father Ignatius Bellamy, appointed rector of St. Anselm Seminary in 1907. Bellamy was a rising theological star, author of essays on Marian ecstasies, and a rumored favorite of Bishop Fallen himself. But in the summer of 1914, 1 year after the 12 disappeared, Bellamy was found collapsed on the sanctuary floor, soaked in blood that wasn't his. He had sliced out his own tongue. There were no signs of struggle. No note, no attacker, only the chapel walls blackened by candle soot, and Bellamy's blood forming a strange spiral traced from altar to pew. He survived barely. When questioned, he scribbled a single word on a communion napkin beneath. Within a week, he was transferred to a silent Carmelite monastery in Idaho, where he took a vow of perpetual penance and never spoke or wrote again. His room was found lined with rosaries made of bone. His diary, confiscated by church authorities, was never seen again, but one torn page survived in diocesan archives, mistakenly filed under property deeds. The boys did not go willingly. Something wore their faces. I saw it bless the bread. He died in 1942. His last act, he refused the Eucharist. Hidden among St. Anselm's archived course materials, filed between copies of Aquinas and Augustine, was a single untranslated manuscript, hand-bound in goatskin. No title, no author, just a Latin inscription on the first page. Qui adorat vacuum, passit demonia. He who worships the void feeds the demons. It was never meant to be in the library. The text is not church-sanctioned. It speaks not of God's light, but of God's absence, of rituals performed not to invite divinity, but to keep something ancient sealed beneath the altar. This unholy theology taught that a hollow Christ, crucified but never risen, still bleeds through time, leaking absence into the world. That what we call sanctity may be a containment system. One diagram in the manuscript mirrors the architecture of St. Anselm's sub-chapel exactly. Another shows 12 men standing in a circle, each missing a face, their hands pierced with nails not as sacrifice, but as anchors. One marginal note, written in modern English, was found in the back. Matthew saw this. They all did, but they kept praying even after the walls bled. It was signed only B. Bellamy or something else. By 1931, St. Anselm was nearly abandoned. The enrollment had dropped to single digits, and the faculty had thinned to a skeletal staff of silent, pale-eyed monks. But one young seminarian, Thomas Jeru, kept a journal, now hidden in the library of Catholic mysticism in Providence. In it he wrote about the nights. There's something wrong with the floors in the chapel. At 3:17 a.m. exactly they knock, 12 knocks, spaced like a heartbeat, and you can hear breathing, not heavy, but like a whisper trying to be silent. Jeru wrote of the silence that followed each Mass, of how the Eucharist left a metallic taste in his mouth, of how, when he walked alone past the sealed stairwell beneath the apse, he could hear chanting in a language he didn't recognize. And then the dreams started. Dreams of faces stitched shut, of confession booths filled with insects, of mouths that opened only to reveal other mouths. One entry scrawled in blood, smeared, "The prayers go down, not up. I think the chapel is feeding it." Jeru disappeared in February 1932. His diary ends abruptly with only one final line: "I saw their hands coming through the stone." According to the fragmented notes of Brother Paschal, the last living monk to serve at St. Anselm, before its closure in 1937, a private ritual was held every year on June 12th, the exact anniversary of the failed ordination in 1913. But there was no congregation, no bells, no incense, just a litany whispered in the dark, conducted by torchlight in the upper chapel. Directly above the sealed subchapel, Pascal wrote that those present didn't speak before or after. They fasted for 72 hours, then entered in silence. The Mass began precisely at midnight and lasted until 3:17 a.m. The same hour Thomas Geroux had recorded the 12 knocks in his journal. The monks would kneel in a circle around the altar, each holding a candle made of sheep tallow and beeswax, but the altar itself was left bare, no cloth, no crucifix, no tabernacle. At the center was placed only a single object, a white priest's stole tied into a noose. Pascal's notes grow erratic toward the end. He writes of faint outlines appearing behind the altar stone, of breathing that came from beneath the floor, of faces, 12 of them, watching in silence. "We're not praying to them," he wrote. "We're begging them to stay down." By the 1940s, the village of Calvert's Hollow, once home to St. Anselm Seminary, was little more than a ghost of itself. Maps still show it, but few roads lead there. The remaining population aged into silence. Children stopped being born. The church bells rang only in wind. When journalists attempted to document the lost seminary in 1948, residents refused to speak, not out of hostility, but out of something closer to dread. One elderly woman said only, "We never built the town, the priests did. We just lived beside them. What's most chilling isn't what remains, but what's missing." Every library ledger between 1909 and 1914 was stripped of names. Newspaper archives show blank pages, and the town's founding records replaced with pages of Latin prayer and hand-drawn sigils, scratched into municipal volumes in what appears to be dried blood. A reporter named Ellis Crane spent 3 weeks interviewing survivors. He never published. His notes were found decades later in a condemned farmhouse just outside Calvert's Hollow. The last page: "They don't remember the priests because the priests didn't die. They changed. The Mass changes you if it's said backward." Crane vanished on Pentecost Sunday. The town bell rang 13 times that night. Liturgical scholars examining fragments of old liturgy manuals from St. Anselm's archives made a disturbing discovery: a handwritten Mass titled simply Missa in verses, the inverted Mass. It follows the traditional Roman rite almost exactly, until the offertory. At that point, the prayers reverse. Instead of "lift up your hearts," the celebrant intones, "bend down your necks." The Sanctus is spoken in a mirrored Latin. The bread is not broken, but buried, and the wine never poured. In the rite's conclusion, there is no blessing, only a chant, non fiat lux. Let there be no light. The inverted Mass requires 12 celebrants standing in a circle, their eyes covered, their palms marked with ash. Each one must remain silent throughout, except one, the vox mortumi voice of death, who recites the homily from beneath the altar itself. According to notes found in the margins of a novice's psalter, this ritual was practiced just once in St. Anselm's lower chapel in June of 1913, and when it concluded, the 12 who stood returned not as themselves, but as something else, something that could imitate breath, speech, prayer, but could never again take communion, because the body they served was no longer Christ's. In 1966, nearly 3 decades after St. Anselm was officially condemned and shuttered, a team of diocesan archivists arrived to catalogue what remained. The seminary was slated for demolition. Most of the furniture had rotted, the stained glass shattered by storms, but deep within the sacristy vault they found a single item preserved on a blood-red cloth, a golden chalice, unblemished, untarnished, and completely dry. It bore no maker's mark, no inscription, yet when holy water was poured in, the liquid disappeared, not spilled, not evaporated, vanished. Tests confirmed the interior was perfectly intact. But nothing, no wine, no water, no blood, could remain inside it longer than 7 seconds, a terrified archivist later wrote in a confidential Vatican memo, "It rejects the sacrament, it unblesses." That chalice now rests in a sealed reliquary beneath the Vatican's Archivum Secretum, labeled only Instrumentum Maledictum #A12. But one photograph of the chalice taken before its removal shows something impossible. When enlarged, the reflection in the metal bowl reveals 12 figures standing behind the photographer, robe-clad, head bowed, but with mouths stretched open, too wide as if still trying to sing. But the Mass had long ended, and what they served no longer listens. In 1971, long after the seminary was considered abandoned, something strange began to occur. Local hunters reported Latin chanting echoing through the forest at dusk. Travelers claimed to see candlelight flickering in the broken chapel windows, and twice hikers discovered bloodied clerical garments nailed to trees, without any trace of bodies nearby. Out of desperation, the diocese quietly dispatched Father Adlai Morau, a Vatican-trained exorcist with over 200 sanctioned rites under his belt. His job was simple: assess, bless, and seal the site permanently. He lasted less than an hour. The moment Morau stepped into the chapel, he collapsed, vomiting blood and screaming in Old Church Slavonic, a language he did not speak. Dragged out by his escorts, he regained lucidity only after being driven 13 miles away. When asked what he saw, his only answer was, they weren't trapped, they were being fed. Morau submitted no written report. He requested immediate laicization the following week and disappeared into a monastic life in rural Argentina, never again performing Mass. A scribbled note was found beneath his pillow days after his retreat. "It's not possession, it's replacement." St. Anselm was never exorcised, because whatever resides there doesn't fear holy water. It remembers it. In 1983, a graduate theology student from Fordham University, Elias Drexler, began a dissertation on suppressed American religious sites. He was brilliant, obsessive, and arrogant enough to go where even the church refused. He broke into St. Anselm on the night of June 11th. In a tape recording later recovered from his satchel, Drexler narrates the descent. His voice is calm at first, curious, even amused, until he reaches the sealed staircase beneath the apse. The final 15 minutes of the recording are erratic, shaky breathing, a strange scraping sound, and then, finally, words. They're not corpses, they're positions, 12 rolls, 12 mouths. It reuses them. I thought I was reading about liturgy. I was reading an instruction manual for containment. One of them turned to look at me. It had no eyes, just a collar. The last sound is Drexler whispering the Latin refrain from the Missa in verses, non fiat lux. His body was found 3 weeks later in a condemned rest stop 2 counties away, dressed in priest's robes, hands burned into a prayer position, tongue removed, in his pocket, a torn page from an ordination program. 12 names, all circled, including his own. In 1997, a gaunt, barefoot man stumbled into St. Agnes Parish in Albany during a midnight vigil. His cassock was torn, soaked in mud, and decades out of date. He walked to the pulpit, stood silently for several minutes, then whispered a single sentence into the microphone before collapsing. They chose 12, but one was listening. Hospital staff recorded his name as Br. Samon, though no record of that name existed in any known seminary registry. His fingerprints matched no criminal or federal database. He refused food, slept standing, and constantly wept during Mass. But it was what he said in the confessional that froze the blood of Father Lasky, the parish priest. I was meant to die in 1913. I was supposed to be the 13th. But I ran, I left them there, I hear them still, every night, they pray backwards. He described the lower chapel in impossible detail. The 12, the inverted Mass, the moment their faces changed. He begged to be forgiven, then clawed at his skin as if something inside him was trying to escape. That night, he disappeared from the hospital. The sheets were soaked with blood, but there was no trail, only an imprint, like 12 kneeling figures had surrounded his bed. The seminary was finally demolished in the winter of 2004 under the quiet authorization of the Archdiocese. No press release, no announcement. The records list the reason as structural instability, but witnesses, mostly construction crew and local maintenance workers, reported far stranger occurrences. The stone altar in the upper chapel refused to crack. Every attempt to break it, drills, sledgehammers, even thermal lances, was met with resistance that defied explanation, not by hardness, but by sound. Every strike echoed not once, but 12 times, like the altar was responding. On the 5th day, one worker, Miguel Alvarez, descended beneath the floorboards with a camera. He didn't scream. He didn't come running back. He simply walked out of the building, climbed into his truck, and drove it into a ravine. When his coworkers returned upstairs, they found the altar split in two, not from above, from beneath. From the cracked stone flowed a steady, syrupy stream of black, red liquid. Tests confirmed it was blood. Human, type AB, and riddled with DNA from over a dozen individuals. None of them matched any living profile. The liquid stopped flowing at exactly 3:17 a.m. That same night, every light in the county's Catholic churches flickered 12 times, then went dark. Following the demolition of St. Anselm, the Archdiocese issued an internal decree. All references to the Calvert's Hollow Seminary are to be expunged. Overnight, every clerical registry from 1866 to 1937 was revised. Faculty listings were blacked out. Ordination rosters reprinted. The Vatican archives themselves received new copies, with pages removed and signatures forged. When researchers requested documentation under canon law in 2006, they were met with a chilling uniform reply. St. Anselm Seminary never existed. But it had. Maps prove it. So do construction permits, private letters, and the ruins themselves. A single surviving yearbook photo from 1912, stored anonymously in a Midwestern private collection, shows 13 young men in cassocks, standing in front of a crumbling statue of St. Jude. Their eyes are blacked out, not scratched, not burned, blacked out from within the photograph. Beneath the image, someone had scrawled in Latin, Qui numquam missum dixerunt, they who never said the Mass. A postscript in English followed. We built the church to hold back something older, but we got too close and they said it backward. The Vatican archivist who found the image disappeared the next week. Her office door was locked from the inside. Inside it, 12 burnt candles, still warm. Today, the land where St. Anselm once stood is just an overgrown clearing near Calvert's Hollow. The seminary is gone, razed to dust, its foundations buried under gravel. But the earth remembers. Nothing grows there, not weeds, not moss, not even insects cross its surface. Drones flown over the area lose signal. GPS systems reroute. The soil samples show no abnormalities. No toxins, no radiation. But farmers say even their animals refuse to go near it. One described it as dead land pretending to be dirt, and every June 12th, the date of the lost ordination, the clearing sweats. Locals report a warm mist rising from the earth just after midnight, thick and metallic, smelling like rusted water or old communion wine. If you stay too long, you begin to feel it in your ears. A low drone, a vibration not quite sound, something trying to chant without a mouth. Paranormal investigators who camped there in 2012 recorded 3 hours of static, interrupted only once. A deep male voice, whispering 12 names. Then silence, then breathing, not one breath. 12. The next morning, all 12 investigators were found asleep in a circle, hands folded as if in prayer. None of them remembered falling asleep, but all of them had nosebleeds. At exactly 3:17 a.m., Dr. Lena Voss was a professor of American religious history at Georgetown. Cold, rational, skeptical, she devoted 10 years to debunking supernatural claims about the Church, until she encountered the ordination list of 1913. The document was sent anonymously, watermarked with the seal of St. Anselm, 12 names, one scratched out, next to it in a different hand. He listened. Voss dismissed it, at first. But then her students began reporting strange phenomena during her lectures, lights flickering when the 12 names were read aloud, chalkboards erasing themselves, recordings of her voice reversing playback. Even while she was still speaking, in 2015, Voss delivered a public lecture titled Myth and Fabrication in Catholic Folklore. Halfway through, she paused, looked out at the crowd, then slowly she spoke all 12 names from the list. Clearly, calmly, as if in ritual, after the lecture, she collapsed. Eyewitnesses said her eyes rolled back, and she began reciting Latin phrases backwards in a guttural, masculine voice. She was hospitalized. Her final journal entry, scrawled across a chapel bulletin, read, "They were not priests, they were locks, and I just opened one." Voss never taught again, but to this day the footage of her lecture cannot be played without glitching. Especially at exactly 3:17 a.m. In 2019, a sound technician named Victor Hale purchased a box of old reel tapes at an estate auction near Albany. Most were blank. One was labeled simply, "Ordination, Mass, June 12, 1913, do not play." Hale, a skeptic, threaded it anyway. The tape begins with silence, then Gregorian chant, slurred off key as if sung through water, a dozen voices, at first faint, then rising in intensity. Latin phrases are intoned, but inverted, warped. Audio analysts would later confirm the chants are phonetically impossible for human vocal cords to sustain. Halfway through, the chant stops, then a new voice, low, hollow, like breath passing through a throat not meant to speak. "This is the 12th. We are beneath the bread, beneath the stone. They let us in, scraping, weeping, then 12 sudden gasps, simultaneous, then silence. When Hale attempted to digitize the recording, every file was corrupted. His studio filled with static at 3:17 a.m. for 12 consecutive nights, even when all equipment was unplugged. He mailed the original reel to a Vatican contact. It arrived blank. But in his last voicemail to a friend, Hale whispered, "I don't think the Mass was stopped. I think it's still happening, just deeper, if you travel far enough, through cracked archives, silent towns, censored documents, erased maps, you'll reach it. Not a place, exactly, not anymore, a silence beneath the structure of belief, a chapel built under every chapel, the wound beneath the altar. 12 men once knelt in that space, believing they were about to be ordained. They had studied, fasted, confessed. Their hands were clean, their voices steady, but the ritual was never meant to lift them up. It was meant to open something down. They became more than priests. They became anchors. 12 still points in a spiraling mass that never ended, and now the signs return. Always on June 12th, candles relight themselves, names vanish from parish records, and somewhere, in a chapel you've never seen but somehow always known, you feel it, a 13th kneeling spot. Empty, waiting, because the Mass was designed for 12, but it only truly begins when the 13th speaks.